So, with very grand response of you, I am trying another gland, that is adrenal gland. So, welcome all of you. It is all possible just because of your response and what I said, demand of my very sincere students. So, these glands, that is adrenal glands, they are present on our kidneys. Therefore, another name from them, that is called as suprarenal glands. आपण त्यांना आणखी एक नाव देतो, that is suprarenal glands. They are on the kidneys. These are pair glands present on each kidneys. So while studying the excretory system, we have mentioned them over there. If we observe this gland in sectional view, if we take a transverse section passing through this triangular cap-shaped gland, we will find that it is divided into two regions. The outer region we call it as adrenal cortex, and the central region we call it as adrenal medulla. Entire structure, it is well protected in a connective tissue capsule as other glands we have seen. So, if we observe all these layers of cortex as well as medulla histologically in detail, we find that the cortex shows further three different layers, one below the other, secreting different hormones, and inside that medulla is situated. So, we will see these details of the cortex and medullary layers. In cortex, the outermost layer which you are observing here, a thin layer of connective tissue, that is protective capsule. Below that, a layer which is not much thick as compared to the other layers, that layer we call it as zona glomerulosa. Below that, the thick layer you are observing here, that is zona fasciculata, and innermost layer that is called as zona reticularis. So all these three layers, they are going to form the cortex. Below that, you are observing here the thin layer of medulla, that is as compared to cortex, medulla is little bit thinner layer. So these layers, they show different secretions. So here, as far as the nature of secretions or the hormones of these layers, it is different. The outer layer, that is the cortex, secretes the hormones which are collectively called as corticoids, which are steroidal in nature. More precisely, their biochemical nature is cholesterol. They are steroid in nature, while the secretion of medulla is proteinaceous in nature. We will see what are these exact hormones. The first layer of corticoid, cortex चा जो पहिला लेयर आहे त्याला आपण झोना ग्लोमेरुलोसा म्हटलेला आहे, त्याचा secretion, its secretion we call it as mineralocorticoid. Mineralocorticoid, they play important role in the balance of the minerals, that is sodium potassium pump. They play important role in maintaining the body fluids by preserving the sodium levels. In the details, we are going to see what are the normal secretions and what about their abnormalities. We are going to discuss followed by this. The second layer, that is zona fasciculata, it secretes the corticoid, which we call it as glucocorticoid. A more popular term for this is the life-saving hormone, life-saver hormone we call it as. It maintains the level of glucose. It is involved in the balance of glucose, proteins and lipids in the serum. Third layer, that is zona reticularis, it secretes gonadocorticoids, the corticoids which are involved in the proper activity of gonads, that is the reproductive organs, especially the secondary sex characters. In case of males and females, they are controlled by these hormones, that is the gonadocorticoids. The innermost layer, that is medulla, it secretes the hormones which are proteinaceous in nature, and the precise name for them is adrenaline, or what you call it as epinephrine, which is rather called as emergency hormone, and even other name, that is 3F hormone, that is the hormone which is released during emergency, like fight, that is fighting, during flight and during fright, when we are frightened, जेव्हा आपण भांडतो किंवा फ्लाईटच्या वेळेला किंवा when we are frightened, घाबरलेल्या वेळेला, means when our body is facing some emergency, that time these hormones are secreted. One more, that is noradrenaline, or what you call it as norepinephrine, exactly antagonistic, opposite to this. When we are resting, we are doing nothing, at that time when our body is in relaxed condition, that time, that is when we are not in emergency, that time the noradrenalines, they are secreted to nullify the effects of these. So followed by this, we will see the details of all these hormones, about their normal secretions, their roles in our body, as well as we will see about the disorders related to their hyposecretions or their hypersecretions, that is when they are secreted in low amounts or in the higher amounts. So associated disorders, or what we call them as diseases, we are going to discuss about them in the followed part of this lecture. We continue with the secretions of hormones and their role in the metabolism. So the first hormone we have seen of the cortex, that is the outermost layer, it is mineralocorticoid. The name itself suggests that it is involved in the mineral metabolism, especially the hormone which we have studied in excretory system, that is aldosterone. Aldosterone, it acts on the distal convoluted tubule, that is DCT, of nephron, as well as the collecting ducts, where it stimulates the reabsorption of sodium and water, that is whatever filtrate is formed during urine formation, from that sodium and water is reabsorbed under the influence of this hormone, and potassium and phosphates, they are excreted by the activity of this hormone. So naturally it increases the balance of ions in the body fluids, that is maintaining the water salt balance, and it keeps the osmotic pressure and blood pressure at normal levels. So if it is secreted in lower amounts, that is if hyposecretion is there, then obviously it leads to low blood pressure, low osmotic pressures of the body fluids, leads to low blood pressure in the individual. And on the contrary, if it is secreted in over quantities, that is hypersecretion is there, then it leads to high concentrations of the body fluids with the minerals, that is the sodium potassium pump is activated, and it leads to high blood pressure in the individual. We call it as Conn's disease or Conn's disorder, which is due to hypersecretion. The second hormone, we call it as glucocorticoid, or what I said rightly, that is life-saving hormone. It is involved in the metabolism of carbohydrates, proteins as well as the fats. In case of carbohydrates, it is playing role in gluconeogenesis. That is, the glucose, soluble glucose in the blood is increased by this process. It also involved in the lipolytic reactions and breakdown of the lipids in the adipose tissues, as well as proteolytic reactions. Proteins are broken down, so that from the nutrients the intake of amino acids is hampered by this, it is affected by this. It also works as anti-inflammatory agent. It is working during our immune responses, that is anti-allergic reactions, what we call it as. In that also it is involved. It is used as anti-inflammatory agent for treatments in allergic responses of the bodies. Even it is working as immunosuppressant by acting on the antibody productions. It works as immunosuppressant. Immune response is suppressed by affecting the production of antibodies by them. Nowadays, it is used in the organ transplantations for this category. The next hormone, that is gonadocorticoid, which is acting in the males as well as in the females. So, very small quantities of these gonadocorticoids are secreted in both, that is male and female, by the innermost layer, that is zona reticularis, and it is going to act on the external sex characters, that is what we call them as secondary sex characters. They are affected by these hormones. As the effect of these hormones, they are nullified in the opposite sexes by the secretions of their gonads. We call them as androgens and estrogens. Androgens in case of males and estrogens in case of females. Means in the human being, both they are secreted in small quantity, but in female the male corticoid is suppressed by the secretion of their gonads, while vice versa is the case in case of males. मेल्स मध्ये फीमेल हार्मोन सप्रेस केलं जाईल आणि फीमेल मध्ये मेल हार्मोन त्यांच्याकडून सप्रेस केलं जाईल, सो दॅट द पर्सन शोज normal secondary sex characters like the growth of beard and mustaches, masculine body, hoarse voice in case of males, all what we call them as the secondary sex characters, while in case of females the development of breasts or all other feminine characters, they are associated with them. So these are the normal functions of these hormones, which are generally called as corticoids. So we will see what are the abnormal conditions related to the secretions of these adrenal hormones followed by this. So followed by, we will see what are the disorders which are related to abnormal secretions of the adrenal cortex. So the hyposecretions, that is lower amounts of secretions than the normal, they lead to some symptoms in the person which are collectively called as Addison's disease. So here both, that is mineralocorticoids as well as glucocorticoids, their hyposecretions, they are going to lead to these symptoms which are called as Addison's disease. It is obvious because due to lower secretions of these corticoids, the body fluids, they show lower amounts of the minerals, or what we call them as salts. Salt water balance is disturbed in them. They are having low concentrations of the sodium as well as glucose in their blood serum, and it leads to low blood pressure in them. Even it leads to the other symptoms like nauseatic feelings in them, and the weight loss is also observed. Even they show the atrophies of muscles, that is disorders which are related to muscular pains. Total muscular weakness is observed in such persons. We call it as Addison's disease. While we have mentioned the life-saving hormone, that is glucocorticoid, so which maintains the glucose level of our blood. So that is secreted during the emergencies, that is when the human being or the animals, they are preparing themselves for the emergencies, for saving the life. So that time that is secreted. So if it is in low amount, it is going to lead to such disorders. Next hormone, the hormonal imbalance, that is because of hypersecretions, that is over secretions than the normal amount, which leads to disorder which we call it as Cushing's disease. So exactly opposite to this, the conditions are there, that is the person is having more amount of ions in the serum, as well as it leads to more osmotic pressure and obviously high blood pressure or hypertension in such persons, leading to obesity, what we call it as. Exactly opposite to the first. Here weight loss was observed, and here the persons, they are overweight or they are obese because entire metabolic activities, they are hyper in them. It is all these ions, they lead to high blood pressure in them. So it is all about the very important glands, that is the adrenal glands, which are playing role in so many important metabolic activities of our body.